See this headstone here? It's for Cappy, a little dog who lived back in the early 1900s. When Cappy's owner had guests over, she would put a toy piano down in front of the spaniel, and Cappy would bat his little paws at the keys, not really playing anything in particular, just making noise. But that was plenty to get some laughs from his audience. It was music that only those who love dogs can imagine. This is Cousin Jane. The monkey. Jane used to travel the Boston area as a part of a little organ grinder troupe with a horse and a couple of Italian women. This is Baby Oplia. For 15 years, his owner carried him around in a handbag, and now here he is enshrined in stone, handbag and all. And hey, that's just a few to whet your appetite. Welcome to the Pine Ridge Pet Cemetery, one of the oldest, biggest, and most historic pet cemeteries in the entire world. This place is absolutely chock full of amazing stories and wonderful animals that deserve a little recognition. So let's get at her. Hey, let's start this off with one of my favorite stories in the entire cemetery. Let me introduce you to Snow White, the little fox terrier. Snow White here was adopted by a family back in 1904, a Mr. and Mrs. Elmsley. And with them, he lived a pretty normal dog's life until a fateful night in 1905 when the hotel that his family was staying in suddenly caught on fire. Quick on his feet, little Snow White sprung into action. Jumping up on his owner's bed, he grabbed Mr. Elmsley by the ear and pulled until the man woke up and realized the danger. All three of them rushed out of the building, and Snow White here was hailed a hero. Truly a brave little dog. Good boy, Snow White. Way to show some courage. I'm proud of you, buddy. This stone here is for Bobby Shirley, a parrot. From what I've read, it seems like Bobby was a pretty smart little guy. He could even call out the names of everyone in the family that owned him. Pretty cool, huh? Bobby's owners used to come and visit him here every once in a while, and sometimes they'd even bring along his sister, Betty Shirley. And hey, there's actually another parrot buried here too, Polly Parrot. She's in the very, very, very back. Maybe the most peaceful spot in the whole cemetery. Hey, here's one of the most famous stones in the whole cemetery. This grave right here is for 3 dogs, Donald Stewart, Royal Nelson, and Laddie Miller. Treasured pets of Lizzie Borden. Now, if you don't know who Lizzie is, that's cool. Long story short, Borden hit the national news back in the 1890s for the brutal axe murder of both her parents. And although Lizzie was eventually acquitted of the crime, nobody else was ever convicted, and many still consider Lizzie the prime suspect today. But as for the dogs, everything I read seemed to suggest that Lizzie just adored them. I even read something saying that one of her favorite activities was piling into a car with all 3 of the dogs and going out for a drive on the country roads of southern Massachusetts. So from what I've read, this cemetery has like close to 30,000 different burials in it. Most of them are newer, like post 1950-ish, but I don't really want to go around sticking my camera in front of more recently deceased pets' graves. So I'm mostly sticking to over here where all the very, very old ones are. Oh, and if you're hoping to get a plot for your pet in this cemetery, I'm sorry, but you're out of luck. They actually filled up a few years ago, so they're not taking any new burials at the moment. Hey, check this out. The English actor and Oscar winner George Arliss actually has a couple dogs buried here. Their names were Petey Arliss and Master Billy. Now, I couldn't really find any info on Petey, but there's actually quite a bit of stuff out there on Billy's relationship with Arliss. Apparently, the two were inseparable. Billy traveled the country with Arliss, attending basically every performance. I even read that Arliss loved the little guy so much that he paid to have a new wreath placed on his grave every year. And hey, while he was at it, he also decided that he wanted to pay for wreaths to be placed on all the other forgotten graves that didn't have anyone else watching over them anymore. That was sure nice of you, George. Look, this one's got a sundial built into it. A little too cloudy for me to be able to use it though. Alright, so I definitely want to keep the focus of this video mostly on the cemetery grounds and the animals who are buried here, but I feel like I should also quickly mention a bit about the general history of the place. So this cemetery here was started up in 1907 by Boston's Animal Rescue League, which was established and operated by a woman named Mrs. Anna Smith. Originally, the cemetery was a part of a wider complex that was essentially a shelter and retirement home for horses. Mostly it was like old retired work horses, but I also read that sometimes if a horse was seeming particularly stressed out or overworked or something like that, the owner might just send them up to Pine Ridge for a quick vacation. The shelter even had a way to painlessly euthanize horses that were in a lot of pain, an electrified horse stall that they called the House of Blessed Release. Pretty crazy little detail, huh? Anyway, though, eventually the shelter opened its doors to any kind of animal, not just horses, and that started to really expand the attached cemetery, which is how Pine Ridge eventually grew into what it is today. And hey, check this out. I actually got my hands on a bunch of old newsletters and pamphlets and stuff from when the shelter was really in high gear back in the 1910s and 20s, and these things are just chock full of great pictures and little details and stuff. Like, look, here's a little collie they rescued. Look, here's a little kid that brought in his sick dog for some help. Look at this little dog. He was rescued while floating along on a piece of ice out on the water. Look how scared and nervous he looks. But look, just 2 weeks at the shelter and he's doing great. A stray dog that found a good home through the league. Oh, good. Look, it's Peter the bird. Hey, he's got a basket. Hey, look, those boys brought in a cat they found in an alley. That was nice of them. Oh, hello, Fums. Whoa. Philides. Can she reason? All right, we're getting off track. Let's get back to some headstones. Look, this one's kind of interesting. Is this a half-finished carving of a dog or a cat? Kind of seems like it to me. Pet cemeteries are definitely a great place to go if you need inspiration for really creative names too, like Chickaboo Lee and Irish Molly-O. Probably the most eye-catching marker in the whole cemetery is this mausoleum here. It's for a Yorkshire Terrier named Jessie, who was once owned by a very wealthy merchant and department store owner named R.H. White. Check out the bronze door and bust of Jessie here. This thing cost $3,000 to make back in the day, which would be somewhere in the realm of like $30,000 or $40,000 in 2022. Check this out. This one's just kind of like built into the perimeter wall of the cemetery. It's like almost completely faded nowadays. 1892 to 1900 something, 4? No, can't be that. 1907. Hey, here's another big one. Probably the second or third most famous grave in the whole cemetery behind Lizzie Borden's dogs and maybe this cat that we're going to talk about later. But anyway, this is Igloo, often called the only dog in history to visit both the North and South Poles. You see, Igloo was the pet of Richard E. Byrd, premier explorer of the world's coldest places. As a naval pilot, Byrd went on a plethora of expeditions to both the Arctic and the Antarctic, with Igloo frequently accompanying him on his travels, which is how the little guy ended up seeing both poles. Bird was reportedly so fond of Igloo that when he was offered a new dog free of charge, he thanked the benefactor for their kindness, but ultimately decided that it wouldn't be fair to Igloo to take on a new pet so soon. This little stone gazebo thing here has some pretty cool significance. I read that it was tradition for grieving owners to wait up here and look out over the cemetery while their pet's grave was being dug. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't think I'm gonna be able to actually find this one. I've been wandering around looking for it, but somewhere along the perimeter wall of the cemetery that I'm walking along here is supposed to be a little wooden cross. It's pretty old, so it might be gone by now because it was made of wood instead of stone. But what that cross was supposed to signify was the only human being to be buried in this cemetery. You see, I couldn't find the woman's name anywhere, but from what I've read, the cross was supposed to mark the resting place of an old woman who had it written into her will that when she died, her dog should be euthanized, and then the woman would be cremated and her ashes would be buried along with the dog's body in the same grave. So that grave is somewhere here, but I just can't quite seem to find it, unfortunately. Here's another centerpiece of the cemetery grounds, a monument to dogs in general, all who've lived their lives in companionship to humanity. This headstone here, depicting a cat resting on a cushion, was paid for by a Mrs. Clapp. She actually commissioned an Italian artist to make it, and then had it imported all the way across the Atlantic just to honor her two cats, Frisky and Paul Nemo. And a couple feet away is another stone, this time for Mrs. Clapp's two dogs, Dorothy and Bacante. Check out this picture of the stones I found in an old issue of the Boston Globe from 1915. You can see that they used to stand right next to each other. The dog stone must have been broken sometime in the last century. Tiny gold. Here's a particularly moving one. This is Freddie the cat. And Freddie's owner loved him very, very much. That owner's name was Mrs. Martha J. Moore. And let me recount to you what Mrs. Moore did the first Saturday after Freddie was put to rest. First, she left the hotel she lived in. Then, she took a streetcar. Then, she switched to a bus. Then, she walked a mile into the wind up to Pine Ridge Cemetery. And once she got here, she went to the cemetery's barn, grabbed a soap bucket and brush, and scrubbed down Freddie's gravestone until it was sparkling clean. And then she did the exact same thing every Saturday for 27 years straight, all the way up until she passed away herself at almost 90 years old. As she got older, sometimes she had to take a taxi up to the top of the hill, but she still came. Every week. I'm sure Freddie appreciated that. This here is Roger, who is so beloved by his community that he even got an obituary printed for him in the local newspaper. Roger's owner was an attorney named Mr. Beggs, who traveled all the way down to Morristown, New Jersey, just to pick out Roger from one of the country's best seeing eye dog schools. This one says, "Dear little chum, Rags." This right here is a headstone for Fuzzy, who was reportedly the favorite dog of the cemetery's founder, Mrs. Smith. This one says, "Heather, Queen of Scotties." There she is. This here is Betty the Collie. By all accounts, a pretty smart little dog. Whenever the radio was on, she'd sit up straight on the couch, ears perked, listening attentively, making sure to catch the latest news or maybe a particularly moving opera. Alright, so I've been filming here for a few hours now, wandering around looking for headstones, and I think there's a few that I'm just not going to be able to find. Whether they're gone or destroyed or too faded for me to read or just plain too hard to spot among the literal thousands of graves here, can't find them. So let's just do a quick rapid fire rundown of a few pets that I wanted to talk about but can't find. Alright, we got Fairy the blind Pomeranian, Gypsy, the dog whose favorite food was cabbage and boiled onions, Tom the squirrel, who fell out of a tree when he was just a baby and was taken in and raised by the Animal League. And there's also supposed to be a stone here that just says "Dogs is folks," which I thought was really good, and a stone in the shape of a dog sitting in a briefcase that I can't find. And lastly, somewhere around here are assorted graves for a robin, a hen, an iguana, a pufferfish, a few white mice, a guinea pig, an ocelot, and a couple of turtles. But I couldn't find any of those either. And now it's time to close this video with a simple little grave that I think sums up this place perfectly. It's another pretty famous one. In fact, there's a very good chance that you might have even seen a picture of this grave floating around on the internet before. It's for a cat named Dewey. And we don't really know anything about Dewey. We don't know what he was like, what his favorite food was, if he ever saved any lives, if he ever explored any distant lands, if his owner was a famous actor or murderer. None of that. But we don't really have to know those things either. All we need to know just how important Dewey was is the inscription on his grave. He was only a cat, but he was human enough to be a great comfort in hours of loneliness and pain. See what I mean? Despite all the crazy stuff we've been talking about, all the big extravagant monuments, all the famous owners, no one pet in this cemetery is any more or less important than the others. Every one of these little critters meant a lot to somebody, and that's all that matters. Take it from me. I know. Thanks for watching.